It was a quiet afternoon at a small gas station on the edge of town. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the pavement. An elderly couple, both in their late 70s, pulled up in their old but well-maintained sedan. They moved slowly but with purpose, their years of companionship evident in the way they worked together seamlessly. The man stepped out first, his slightly hunched frame making its way to the gas pump. His wife stayed in the car for a moment, rummaging through her purse for her wallet. The gas station was mostly empty, save for a few cars parked near the convenience store. Inside, a young cashier was leaning on the counter, scrolling through his phone, bored out of his mind. Outside, the elderly man struggled slightly with the gas pump, his hands trembling as he tried to insert the nozzle. His wife noticed and quickly stepped out of the car to help him. Together, they managed to get the pump working, sharing a quiet laugh as they did. It was a simple moment, but it spoke volumes about their bond. Unbeknownst to them, a pair of eyes was watching from a distance. A man in his early 40s, dressed in casual clothes, sat in his pickup truck a few spots away. He had stopped to grab a coffee and was sipping it slowly, enjoying the peace of the afternoon. But there was something about him that stood out. His posture was straight, his eyes sharp, and his gaze constantly scanning his surroundings. He was an off-duty cop, a veteran of the force with over 15 years of experience. He had seen it all, and his instincts were always on, even when he wasn't in uniform. As the elderly couple finished filling up their tank and began walking toward the convenience store, the sound of roaring engines filled the air. The off-duty cop's eyes immediately darted toward the entrance of the gas station. A group of bikers, about 6 of them, rolled in on their motorcycles. They were loud, their laughter echoing across the parking lot as they revved their engines unnecessarily. They parked their bikes near the elderly couple's car, taking up more space than needed, and dismounted with an air of arrogance. The bikers were a rough-looking bunch, dressed in leather jackets adorned with patches and insignias. They seemed to be in their late 20s or early 30s, and their behavior immediately set off alarm bells in the off-duty cop's mind. He watched closely as they swaggered toward the store, their voices loud and their language laced with profanity. The elderly couple, now inside the store, were oblivious to the commotion outside as they browsed the aisles for a few snacks. The off-duty cop stayed in his truck, his coffee forgotten. He had a bad feeling about the situation, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe the bikers were just passing through, blowing off steam. But as he watched, one of the bikers noticed the elderly couple's car parked near the pumps. He said something to his friends, and they all turned to look at the vehicle. Their laughter grew louder, and they began making crude comments about the car's age and condition. The off-duty cop's jaw tightened. He knew where this was going. He had seen it before, bullies looking for an easy target. He quietly reached for his phone, just in case things escalated. But for now, he stayed put, watching and waiting. The elderly couple, still inside the store, had no idea what was about to happen. The bikers, on the other hand, were just getting started. As the elderly couple stepped out of the store, bags in hand, they were immediately met with the bikers' taunts. One of the bikers, a tall man with a shaved head, stepped in front of the elderly man and blocked his path. "Nice ride, old-timer," he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You sure you can still drive that thing?" His friends laughed, egging him on. The elderly man, though visibly shaken, tried to keep his composure. "Excuse us, please," he said politely, trying to step around the biker. But the biker didn't budge. Instead, he leaned in closer, his face inches from the elderly man's. "What's the hurry, Grandpa? You got somewhere to be?" he mocked, his breath reeking of alcohol. The elderly woman, sensing the tension, clutched her husband's arm tightly. "Let's just go," she whispered, her voice trembling. But the biker wasn't done. He reached out and snatched the bag of snacks from her hand, holding it up like a trophy. "What's in here, huh?" Some prunes and denture cream, he jeered, his friends roaring with laughter. The off-duty cop had seen enough. He stepped out of his truck, his movements calm but deliberate. He didn't say a word, but his presence was enough to make the bikers pause. They turned to look at him, their expressions a mix of surprise and defiance. The tall biker, still holding the bag of snacks, sneered at the newcomer. "What's your problem, buddy? This doesn't concern you." The off-duty cop didn't respond immediately. He simply walked up to the biker, his eyes locked on his. There was a moment of tense silence as the two men stood face to face. Then, in a calm but firm voice, the cop said, "Give them back their things and leave. Now." The biker hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond. His friends, sensing trouble, began to back away slightly. But the tall biker wasn't ready to back down. "Or what?" he challenged, his voice rising. "You gonna make me?" The off-duty cop didn't flinch. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out his badge, holding it up for the biker to see. The biker's eyes widened, and for the first time, a flicker of fear crossed his face. He quickly handed the bag back to the elderly woman and muttered an apology under his breath. His friends, now thoroughly intimidated, hurried back to their bikes and started them up, the roar of their engines filling the air as they sped off. The elderly couple, still shaken but unharmed, thanked the off-duty cop profusely. He assured them that they were safe and helped them back to their car. As they drove away, the cop watched them go, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. He had done his job, even when he wasn't on duty. But deep down, he knew that this wasn't over. The bikers had been humiliated, and people like that didn't take kindly to being shown up. He would have to keep an eye out, just in case. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the gas station parking lot. The off-duty cop drove away, his mind still replaying the confrontation with the bikers. He knew their type, arrogant, entitled, and quick to anger. They weren't the kind to let things go easily. He kept an eye on his rearview mirror, half expecting to see their motorcycles tailing him, but the road behind him remained empty. For now, at least, it seemed they had decided to retreat. Meanwhile, the elderly couple made their way home, their nerves still frayed from the encounter. The husband gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, while his wife sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching the bag of snacks the biker had returned. She kept glancing out the window, as if expecting the bikers to reappear at any moment. The peaceful afternoon they had hoped for had been shattered, and the unease lingered in the car like a heavy fog. Back at the gas station, the young cashier had witnessed the entire scene from behind the counter. He had been too scared to intervene, but now that the bikers were gone, he stepped outside to survey the area. The parking lot was quiet again, the only sound the faint hum of the gas pumps. He shook his head, muttering to himself about how some people had no respect. He made a mental note to keep an eye out for trouble in the future, though he hoped it wouldn't come to that. The bikers, however, were far from done. They had ridden a few miles down the road before pulling over at a secluded spot near the woods. The tall biker, the one who had confronted the elderly couple, was fuming. His face was red with anger, and he paced back and forth, kicking at the dirt. "That guy thinks he's so tough, flashing his badge like that," he spat. "Who does he think he is?" One of the other bikers, a shorter man with a scruffy beard, tried to calm him down. "Forget it, man. It's not worth it. He's a cop. We don't need that kind of trouble." But the tall biker wasn't listening. "No way," he snapped. "We're not letting some off-duty cop embarrass us like that. We need to teach him a lesson." The others exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't as eager for a fight, but they also didn't want to challenge their leader. After a few moments of tense silence, the tall biker made up his mind. "We're going back," he declared. "And this time, we're not leaving until we settle the score." The group reluctantly agreed, and soon they were back on their bikes, roaring down the road toward the gas station. The sun had almost set by the time they arrived, and the parking lot was bathed in the dim glow of the overhead lights. The cashier, who had just finished locking up the store, froze when he saw the bikers pull in. His heart raced as he quickly ducked behind a nearby dumpster, hoping they wouldn't notice him. The bikers parked their bikes and gathered near the pumps, their voices low but intense. The tall biker was clearly the ringleader, and he was laying out a plan. "We wait here," he said. "That cop's bound to come back this way sooner or later. When he does, we make sure he regrets messing with us." The others nodded, though some of them looked uneasy. They knew this was a dangerous game, but they also knew better than to argue with their leader. They spread out around the gas station, keeping to the shadows and waiting for their target to appear. Meanwhile, the off-duty cop had driven a few miles down the road before pulling over at a diner to grab a quick bite. He sat in a corner booth, sipping a cup of coffee and replaying the events of the afternoon in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that the bikers weren't done. He knew their type, they didn't take kindly to being humiliated, and they had a tendency to hold grudges. He made a mental note to check in on the elderly couple later, just to make sure they were okay. As he finished his meal, he decided to head back toward the gas station. It was on his way home, and he wanted to make sure everything was calm. He paid his bill, got back in his truck, and started driving. The roads were quiet, the only sound the hum of his engine and the occasional chirp of crickets in the distance. When he pulled into the gas station, he immediately noticed something was off. The parking lot was empty, but the air felt tense, like the calm before a storm. He parked near the pumps and stepped out of his truck, his instincts on high alert. He scanned the area, his eyes narrowing as he noticed movement in the shadows near the edge of the lot. Before he could react, the bikers emerged from the darkness, surrounding him in a semicircle. The tall biker stepped forward, a smug grin on his face. Well, look who decided to come back," he sneered. "Thought you could just walk away, huh?" The off-duty cop remained calm, his hands at his sides. He knew better than to show fear. "This is your last chance," he said evenly. "Walk away now, and I won't press charges." The bikers laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. The tall biker took a step closer, his fists clenched. "You're not in charge here, cop. This is our turf, and you're gonna learn what happens when you mess with us." The off-duty cop didn't flinch. He had been in situations like this before, and he knew how to handle himself. But he also knew he was outnumbered. He glanced around, looking for an opening or a way to de-escalate the situation. But the bikers were closing in, their expressions growing more aggressive by the second. Just as the tension reached its peak, the sound of a car engine broke the silence. A pair of headlights swept across the parking lot, and a car pulled in. The bikers hesitated, glancing toward the newcomer. It was the elderly couple, back at the gas station to thank the cop properly. They had no idea what they were walking into. The elderly couple's car rolled slowly into the gas station, its headlights cutting through the dimly lit parking lot. The husband was behind the wheel, his wife sitting beside him, clutching a small gift bag. They had decided to return to thank the off-duty cop properly for his help earlier. But as they pulled in, they immediately sensed something was wrong. The bikers were gathered in a tight circle, their aggressive postures and tense expressions unmistakable even from a distance. The off-duty cop's heart raced as he saw the couple's car. He knew they were walking into a dangerous situation, and he had to act fast. He raised a hand, signaling for them to stay in their car. "Don't get out," he called out, his voice firm but urgent. The elderly man hesitated, his foot hovering over the brake pedal, while his wife looked around nervously, her eyes wide with fear. The bikers, momentarily distracted by the arrival of the couple, turned their attention back to the cop. The tall biker, still the ringleader, smirked. "Looks like your fan club's here," he taunted. Too bad they're about to see you get what's coming to you. The cop kept his eyes on the bikers, his mind racing. He knew he was outnumbered, but he couldn't let things escalate further, especially with innocent bystanders nearby. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "Listen to me," he said, addressing the bikers. "This doesn't have to go any further. Walk away now, and I'll forget this ever happened. But if you don't, you're only making things worse for yourselves." The bikers exchanged glances, some of them clearly uneasy. The tall biker, however, wasn't backing down. "You think you're so tough, huh?" he sneered, taking another step forward. "We're not scared of you. You're just one guy." The cop's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he subtly reached for his phone, keeping it hidden from view. He knew he needed backup, but he also knew he had to buy time. He glanced toward the elderly couple's car, hoping they would stay put. Thankfully, they seemed to understand the gravity of the situation and remained inside, though the wife was visibly shaking. The tall biker noticed the cop's glance and smirked. "What's the matter?" "Worried about your little friends," he said, turning toward the car. He took a few steps in their direction, his expression menacing. The elderly man instinctively locked the doors, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. The gas station parking lot was now a flurry of activity. Police officers moved efficiently, securing the scene and processing the bikers. The tall biker, who had been so bold just moments ago, now sat on the curb with his hands cuffed behind his back, his face a mix of anger and humiliation. The other bikers were similarly restrained, their earlier bravado replaced with sullen silence. The off-duty cop stood nearby, giving his statement to one of the officers. He kept his tone calm and professional, recounting the events without embellishment. As he spoke, his mind kept drifting back to the elderly couple. He hoped they were safely on their way home, far removed from the chaos of the night. He made a mental note to check on them later, once things had settled down. For now, though, his focus was on ensuring the bikers faced the consequences of their actions. One of the officers, a seasoned veteran with a no-nonsense demeanor, approached the tall biker. "You've got a lot of explaining to do," he said, his voice stern. "Harassing innocent people, threatening an officer, this isn't going to end well for you." The biker glared up at him but said nothing. His defiance was still there, but it was tempered by the reality of his situation. He knew he was in deep trouble, and there was no easy way out. Meanwhile, the off-duty cop finished giving his statement and stepped aside to let the officers do their work. He felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The adrenaline that had kept him going during the confrontation was starting to fade, leaving him drained. He leaned against his truck, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. One of the younger officers approached him, a look of admiration on his face. "That was some quick thinking, calling for backup like that," he said. "Things could have gotten really ugly if you hadn't." The cop nodded, though he didn't feel like celebrating. "I just did what I had to do," he said simply. "Those bikers were out of control, and I couldn't let them hurt anyone." The young officer hesitated, then asked, "Do you think they'll come after you? You know, for revenge or something?" The cop sighed. It was a question he'd been asking himself. "I don't know," he admitted. "People like that, they don't like being humiliated. But I'll be ready if they try anything." The officer nodded, clearly impressed by the cop's calm demeanor. "Well, if you need anything, let us know. We've got your back." The cop thanked him and watched as the young officer returned to his duties. He knew he had the support of his colleagues, but he also knew that this incident wasn't over. The bikers might face charges, but that didn't mean they'd learned their lesson. If anything, they might be more determined to prove themselves. As the officers finished processing the scene, the cop decided it was time to head home. He was tired, both physically and emotionally, and he needed some time to decompress. But before he left, he made one last call, to the elderly couple. He wanted to make sure they were okay and to reassure them that the bikers were in custody. The husband answered the phone after a few rings, his voice shaky but relieved. "We're home," he said. "Thank you again for everything. We don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." The cop smiled, though the couple couldn't see it. "I'm just glad you're safe," he said. "The bikers are in custody now, so you don't have to worry about them. But if you see anything suspicious, don't hesitate to call the police." The husband thanked him again, and the cop ended the call. He felt a small sense of satisfaction knowing he'd made a difference, but the weight of the night's events still hung heavy on his shoulders. As he drove home, the streets were quiet, the occasional streetlight casting pools of light on the road. His mind kept replaying the confrontation, analyzing every move, every decision. Had he handled it the right way? Could he have done something differently? It was a habit of his, second-guessing himself after tense situations. But deep down, he knew he'd done everything he could to protect the innocent and uphold the law. When he finally pulled into his driveway, the house was dark except for a single light in the living room. His wife was waiting up for him, a worried expression on her face as he walked through the door. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. He nodded, though he knew he looked exhausted. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a long night." She didn't press him for details, knowing he'd tell her when he was ready. Instead, she handed him a cup of tea and sat beside him on the couch. The warmth of the tea and the quiet comfort of his home helped ease the tension in his shoulders. As he sipped the tea, he thought about the elderly couple and the bikers. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. The bikers might face charges, but they could also try to retaliate. And the couple, though safe for now, might still be shaken by the experience. He made a mental note to follow up with them in the coming days, to make sure they were coping okay. For now, though, he allowed himself to relax, just a little. The storm had passed, but he knew he had to stay vigilant. The world wasn't always kind, and there were always people who needed protecting. It was a heavy burden, but it was one he carried willingly. As he set his empty cup on the table and leaned back on the couch, he felt a sense of quiet determination. No matter what came next, he would be ready. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing he'd done his best in a difficult situation. And sometimes, that was enough. The next morning, the off-duty cop woke up early, his body still carrying the weight of the previous night's events. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, running a hand through his hair as he replayed the confrontation in his mind. The bikers, the elderly couple, the flashing lights of the police cars, it all felt like a blur, but the tension still lingered. He knew he couldn't dwell on it too much, though. Life had to go on, and he had responsibilities to attend to. After a quick shower and a light breakfast, he decided to head to the police station. He needed to file a formal report about the incident and check on the status of the bikers. His wife, sensing his unease, gave him a reassuring smile as he left the house. "Be careful," she said, her voice soft but firm. He nodded, giving her hand a quick squeeze before stepping out the door. The drive to the station was quiet, the streets still sleepy in the early morning light. When he arrived, he was greeted by a few of his colleagues, who had already heard about the previous night's events. "Heard you had quite the adventure," one of them said with a grin. Those bikers didn't know who they were messing with. The cop shrugged, not in the mood for small talk. "Just doing my job," he said simply. He made his way to the desk sergeant, who handed him the necessary paperwork to file his report. As he filled out the forms, he couldn't help but think about the elderly couple. He wondered how they were holding up after the ordeal. Once the paperwork was done, he decided to give them a call. The husband answered after a few rings, his voice sounding a bit stronger than the night before. "We're doing okay," he said when the cop asked how they were. "Still a bit shaken, but we're grateful for what you did. We We didn't expect something like that to happen." The cop nodded, even though the man couldn't see him. "I understand," he said. "It's not something anyone should have to go through. But I'm glad you're safe. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." The husband thanked him again, and the cop ended the call. He felt a small sense of relief knowing the couple was coping, but he also knew they might need time to fully recover from the experience. He made a mental note to check in on them again in a few days. As he put his phone away, one of the officers approached him. "The bikers are being processed," he said. "They're facing charges for harassment, threatening behavior, and a few other things. The tall one, their ringleader, isn't too happy about it." The cop raised an eyebrow. "What's he saying?" The officer smirked. "Not much now. He was mouthing off earlier, but once he realized the seriousness of the charges, he clammed up. I think he's starting to understand the mess he's in." The cop nodded, though he didn't feel entirely reassured. He knew people like the tall biker, they didn't like to back down, even when they were clearly in the wrong. There was a chance this wasn't over, and he needed to stay alert. Later that afternoon, the cop decided to take a drive past the gas station where the incident had occurred. He wanted to see if things had returned to normal and to reassure himself that the area was safe. As he pulled into the parking lot, he noticed the young cashier from the night before sitting outside on a bench, smoking a cigarette. The cop parked his truck and walked over. The cashier looked up, recognizing him immediately. "Hey," he said, nodding. "You're the cop from last night, right?" The cop nodded. "Yeah. Just wanted to check in and see how things are going." The cashier took a drag from his cigarette and exhaled slowly. "It's been quiet," he said. "No sign of those bikers, thankfully. But, thanks for what you did. I didn't know what to do, and I was scared to get involved. You handled it." The cop gave him a small smile. "You did the right thing by staying out of it. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is not make things worse. But if you ever see something like that again, don't hesitate to call the police." The cashier nodded, looking a bit more at ease. "I will. Thanks." The cop stayed for a few more minutes, chatting with the cashier and keeping an eye on the parking lot. Everything seemed calm, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the bikers might not be done causing trouble. He knew he had to stay vigilant, not just for himself but for the people in the community. As he drove away from the gas station, his phone buzzed. It was a text from one of his colleagues at the station. "Bikers are being released on bail. Just a heads up." The cop's jaw tightened. He had expected this, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. He knew the bikers would be angry, and there was no telling what they might do next. He texted back a quick "thanks" and put his phone away, his mind already racing with plans. For now, though, he decided to focus on the present. He had done everything he could to protect the elderly couple and ensure the bikers faced consequences. The rest was out of his hands. As he drove home, the sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the town. It was a new day, and despite the challenges, he felt a quiet sense of determination. No matter what came next, he would be ready. The news that the bikers had been released on bail didn't sit well with the off-duty cop. He knew the legal system had its processes, but it didn't make the situation any less frustrating. As he drove home, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Would the bikers try to retaliate? Would they go after the elderly couple again? Or would they come after him directly? He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. When he got home, his wife could tell something was bothering him. She didn't press him for details, though. She knew he'd talk when he was ready. Instead, she simply handed him a cup of coffee and sat beside him on the couch. The quiet comfort of home helped ease his tension, if only a little. Later that evening, he decided to take a walk to clear his head. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. As he walked, he kept his eyes and ears open, his instincts on high alert. He knew it was unlikely the bikers would show up here, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Halfway through his walk, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the elderly husband. "We just wanted to thank you again for everything. We're doing okay, but we're still a bit nervous. We've decided to stay with family for a few days, just to be safe." The cop felt a small sense of relief. At least the couple was taking precautions. He quickly typed back a response. "That's a good idea. Let me know if you need anything. Stay safe." As he put his phone away, he noticed a car slowly driving down the street. It wasn't unusual for cars to pass by, but something about this one felt off. It was moving too slowly, almost like it was stalking him. He kept walking, his pace steady, but his senses were on high alert. When the car turned at the next intersection and disappeared, he told himself he was just being paranoid. Still, the encounter left him uneasy. The next morning, he decided to visit the police station again. He wanted to check if there had been any updates on the biker's case. When he arrived, he was greeted by the desk sergeant, who handed him a file. "The bikers are laying low for now," the sergeant said. "But we've got eyes on them. If they try anything, we'll know." The cop nodded, flipping through the file. It contained details about the bikers' arrest, their charges, and their release on bail. He noticed that the tall biker, the ringleader, had a history of minor offenses, public disturbances, petty theft, and the like. Nothing too serious, but enough to paint a picture of someone who didn't respect the law. "Any idea where they're staying?" the cop asked. The sergeant shook his head. "They've got a few hangout spots, but nothing concrete. We're keeping an eye on their usual places, though. If they step out of line, we'll be ready." The cop thanked him and left the station, his mind still racing. He knew the police were doing their best, but he also knew that people like the bikers could be unpredictable. He decided to take a drive past some of their known hangouts, just to see if he could spot anything unusual. The first place he checked was a rundown bar on the outskirts of town. It was a known gathering spot for bikers, and the cop had been there a few times on duty. As he drove by, he noticed a few motorcycles parked outside, but there was no sign of the group from the gas station. He made a mental note of the bikes and continued on his way. The next spot was a secluded clearing in the woods, a place where bikers often gathered to drink and party. When he arrived, the area was empty, save for a few empty beer cans and tire tracks in the dirt. It looked like the bikers hadn't been there in a while. As he was about to leave, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from one of his colleagues. "Heads up. The tall biker was spotted near your neighborhood earlier. Just wanted to give you a warning." The cop's heart skipped a beat. So, the car from last night hadn't been a coincidence. The bikers were watching him, testing his boundaries. He quickly typed back a response. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll keep an eye out." He drove home, his mind racing. If the bikers were bold enough to come near his neighborhood, they were clearly trying to send a message. He needed to be prepared, but he also didn't want to escalate the situation unnecessarily. When he got home, he made sure all the doors and windows were locked and checked the security cameras he had installed around the property. Everything seemed normal, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, he slept with one eye open, his instincts on high alert. He knew the bikers were testing him, trying to intimidate him. But he also knew he couldn't let them win. He had a job to do, and he wasn't going to back down. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he made a decision. He would stay vigilant, but he wouldn't let fear dictate his actions. The bikers might be watching him, but he would be watching them too. And if they tried anything, he would be ready. For now, though, all he could do was wait and see what the shadows of doubt would bring. The days that followed were tense but uneventful. The off-duty cop kept a low profile, staying close to home and avoiding unnecessary risks. He checked in regularly with the elderly couple, who were still staying with family, and they assured him they were doing fine. The bikers, meanwhile, seemed to have disappeared. There were no sightings, no reports of trouble, and no signs of retaliation. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. But the cop knew better. He had been in enough situations like this to know that silence didn't always mean peace. The bikers were likely lying low, waiting for the right moment to strike. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, no matter how quiet things seemed. One afternoon, he decided to visit the gas station again. He wanted to check in with the young cashier and see if there had been any further trouble. When he arrived, the cashier was outside, sweeping the parking lot. He looked up as the cop approached, a small smile on his face. "Hey," he said. "Haven't seen you in a while. Everything okay?" The cop nodded. "Yeah, just keeping an eye on things. How's it been here?" The cashier shrugged. "Quiet. Too quiet, honestly. It's like everyone's holding their breath, waiting for something to happen." The cop knew exactly what he meant. The calm felt unnatural, almost oppressive. He glanced around the parking lot, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. Everything seemed normal, but the tension in the air was palpable. "You think they'll come back?" the cashier asked, his voice low. The cop hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if they do, we'll be ready." The cashier nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. He went back to sweeping, and the cop stayed for a few more minutes, watching the street and the cars that passed by. Everything seemed normal, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As he was about to leave, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of his colleagues at the station. "We've got a lead on the bikers. They've been spotted at an old warehouse on the edge of town. Thought you'd want to know." The cop's heart raced. This was the break he'd been waiting for. He quickly typed back a response. "Thanks. I'll check it out." He knew it was risky to go alone, but he also knew he couldn't wait for backup. If the bikers were planning something, he needed to stop them before it was too late. He got in his truck and headed toward the warehouse, his mind racing with possibilities. The warehouse was located in an industrial area on the outskirts of town. It was an old, run-down building, surrounded by overgrown weeds and broken fences. As the cop approached, he noticed a few motorcycles parked near the entrance. His instincts kicked in, and he parked his truck a safe distance away, making sure to stay out of sight. He moved quietly toward the warehouse, keeping to the shadows and staying alert. The sound of voices reached his ears, and he crouched behind a stack of crates to listen. The bikers were inside, their voices loud and angry. He couldn't make out everything they were saying, but he caught enough to know they were planning something. "We can't let him get away with this," one of them said. "He humiliated us in front of everyone. We need to make him pay." The cop's jaw tightened. He had expected this, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. He knew he had to act fast, but he also knew he was outnumbered. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to the station, giving them his location and asking for backup. Then he settled in to wait, his eyes never leaving the warehouse. Minutes felt like hours as he watched and listened. The bikers' voices grew louder, their plans more detailed. They were talking about targeting the gas station again, this time with more force. The cop's heart sank. He couldn't let that happen. Just as he was about to make a move, the sound of sirens filled the air. The bikers inside the warehouse froze, their voices cutting off abruptly. The cop stayed hidden, watching as the bikers scrambled to their motorcycles, their earlier bravado replaced with panic. The police cars arrived quickly, surrounding the warehouse and cutting off any escape routes. The bikers tried to make a run for it, but they were quickly apprehended. The cop watched from the shadows, a sense of relief washing over him. It was over, for now, at least. As the officers handcuffed the bikers and led them away, the cop stepped out of the shadows. One of his colleagues spotted him and nodded in acknowledgement. "Good work," he said. "We've got them now." The cop nodded, though he didn't feel like celebrating. He knew this wasn't the end. The bikers might be in custody, but their anger and resentment wouldn't disappear overnight. He would have to stay vigilant, ready for whatever came next. As he drove home, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the town. The calm had returned, but it felt different this time, less oppressive, more hopeful. The storm had passed, at least for now, and the cop allowed himself a small sense of satisfaction. He had done his job, protected the innocent, and upheld the law. And for now, that was enough. The arrest of the bikers brought a sense of closure, but the off-duty cop knew better than to think it was the end of the story. The legal process would take time, and there was no guarantee the bikers wouldn't try to cause trouble again once they were released. Still, for now, the town was quiet, and the immediate threat had been neutralized. It was a small victory, but one worth celebrating. The next morning, the cop decided to visit the elderly couple. They had returned home after staying with family for a few days, and he wanted to check on them personally. When he arrived at their house, they greeted him warmly, their faces lighting up with gratitude. "We heard what happened," the husband said as he ushered the cop inside. "Thank you for everything. We don't know what we would have done without you." The cop smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. "I'm just glad you're safe," he said. "That's what matters." The couple insisted he stay for a cup of tea, and they sat together in their cozy living room, talking about everything that had happened. The wife, who had been so shaken during the ordeal, seemed much more at ease now. "We were so scared," she admitted. "But knowing you were there, looking out for us, it made all the difference." The cop nodded, feeling a deep sense of responsibility. "It's my job to protect people," he said. "And I'll always do my best to make sure you're safe." As he left their house, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The incident had reminded him why he had become a cop in the first place, to make a difference, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. It wasn't always easy, and it often came with risks, but it was worth it. Later that day, he stopped by the gas station to check in with the young cashier. The parking lot was busy, with cars coming and going, and the cashier was behind the counter, looking more confident than the last time they had spoken. "Hey," the cashier said when he saw the cop. "I heard about what happened. Those bikers won't be causing any more trouble, huh?" The cop shook his head. "Not for a while, at least. But if you see anything suspicious, don't hesitate to call the police." The cashier nodded, looking relieved. "I will. And, thanks. For everything." The cop gave him a small smile and left the store, feeling a sense of satisfaction. The community was safe, and the people he had sworn to protect were grateful. It was a good feeling, one that reminded him why he did what he did. As he drove home, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his wife. "Dinner's ready. Hurry home." He smiled, feeling a sense of warmth. His job was important, but so was his family. They were his anchor, the ones who kept him grounded and reminded him of what truly mattered. When he walked through the door, the smell of home-cooked food greeted him, and his wife and kids were waiting at the table, their faces lighting up when they saw him. "How was your day?" his wife asked as they sat down to eat. The cop thought for a moment, then smiled. "It was a good day," he said. "A really good day." As they ate together, laughing and talking, the cop felt a deep sense of gratitude. The storm had passed, and life was returning to normal. But he knew that peace was fragile, and it was his job to protect it. He would stay vigilant, ready for whatever came next, but for now, he allowed himself to enjoy the moment. The days that followed were quiet, but the cop didn't let his guard down. He kept an eye on the town, checking in with the elderly couple and the gas station cashier regularly. He also stayed in touch with his colleagues at the station, making sure they were aware of any potential threats. The bikers, meanwhile, were facing the consequences of their actions. The tall biker, their ringleader, was looking at serious charges, and the others were being held accountable as well. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step in the right direction. As the weeks passed, the town settled back into its usual rhythm. The gas station was busy, the streets were quiet, and the elderly couple was enjoying their peaceful life once again. The cop, though always alert, felt a sense of closure. He had done his job, and he had done it well. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, his wife joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Everything okay?" The cop nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Yeah," he said. "Everything's okay. I was just thinking about how lucky we are to have this life, this peace. It's not something to take for granted." His wife smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "No, it's not. But we've got each other, and that's what matters." The cop smiled too, feeling a deep sense of contentment. The storm had passed, and the future was uncertain, but he knew he was ready for whatever came next. For now, though, he allowed himself to enjoy the calm, knowing he had done everything he could to protect the people he cared about. And that, he realized, was enough.